Hello and welcome to BMW's updated S1000 XR. Now this bike has really took me by surprise. There's been lots of videos on YouTube about this bike, and a good friend of mine, Ricky Tang, who's recently bought one, has also been singing its praises. So I decided, well, why don't I revisit the XR, because the previous generation I really didn't gel with, and it wasn't a bike that I enjoyed, and I had two of them, and I decided after my time with them not even to make a video. But this time things are actually really very different. So in a moment I'm going to show you a clip that I filmed yesterday. I'll just warn you in advance, it's not the best filming work that I've ever done. I actually pulled over in a field and put a camera up on a fence post because I wanted to share my excitement and enthusiasm part of the way through this test. And to be honest, that enthusiasm has not diminished. This bike has been quite a shock in a very positive way. It's really, for me, very different to that previous generation XR, to the point where, and I'll tell you now before we get to the end of the video, I would buy one of these. They're simply brilliant. And with the typical BMW systems, with the ride modes, the dynamic ESA and the adjustment that you can make within the suspension modes, and of course we've got spring preload adjustment on the rear, you can tailor this bike to feel how you like to ride. And I have had a lot of fun. Anyway, let me show you part of the clip from yesterday. And for 2024, there have been some updates. Now, these updates are incremental, they're not revolutionary, but so far my impressions are they've done a really good job. There have been quite some significant changes with the seat design. They've addressed the vibrations, and let's just address those vibrations straight away. If you want to go looking for them, you're going to find them. I spent an hour on the Autobahns here in Germany, and if you do go looking for them, you can find set RPMs where there is a bit of a tingling coming through the bars and the foot pegs, but really that's not how we ride, is it? And for the first day and a half, the vibrations that are there, you just don't notice. It's just like a normal high performance inline four. So for me, that's a huge improvement. The one that stopped me from looking at this bike very early on when I changed from Multistrada to GS was the seat. And again, BMW have listened and they've made some significant changes to the seat. Now, as you can probably see from the bike, it is filthy. And that is because yesterday when I picked the bike up, it was torrential rain. I didn't have any of my cameras on. It was raining so hard. I had my waterproofs on, and my plan was just to do an hour and a half, come home with the bike and wait for the sunshine today and the dry roads. But what actually happened was that after about 30 minutes, I found that I was actually enjoying being on this bike in the pouring rain. I'm not normally a huge fan of Bridgestone tyres, but actually once these had warmed up, which took about 15-20 minutes in the rain, they started to give some feedback in those corners in the wet, and I actually had a huge amount of fun. So much so that I took my Navigator 6 from the GS with me, and I pulled over after half an hour, reprogrammed it to include some more routes on the way home, phoned my wife and said I'd be back much later, and I actually got home at 7:45. But you can go into the menu system and you can make changes for those conditions, and it was just a couple of button presses, changing the ride mode from dynamic into rain, softened up the throttle response and the power delivery, into the suspension mode, changing it from dynamic into the road, immediately made it more soft and compliant, and then importantly changing the spring preload to minimum to take that preload of the rear spring off, which then gives you the full travel of that spring. The bike sits down a bit lower, and it was a pussycat. It was, for a 170 horsepower bike in the pouring rain, let me just tell you, I had an awful lot of fun yesterday. Suspension and the quality of the components that manufacturers use in our suspension systems on our modern motorbikes is really important, and I would like to highlight a little bit about the changes that the 2024 year model has gone through with regards to the XR. Now I'll swap the bikes around to help me explain this a little bit more, because in the press pack for the new XR, BMW don't really talk very much about the changes to the suspension, and all they really say is that the rear spring strut assembly has been updated and modified to improve the sensitivity and the comfort on the rear shock. But actually it goes a little bit deeper than that. Because we are dealing with a bike that has suspension that is electronically controlled, the engineers can use their algorithms that control the compression and the rebound, not only on the front but on the rear shock as well. And all those little changes for the new 2024 year model bike, for me, have made quite a difference. So let me try and explain this in a simple graphical way. So the previous generation bike, we had dynamic ESA and we had road mode. And if you look at the difference, that was the difference between the two modes. Now, I had no problem with dynamic mode. It worked absolutely fine. But in the road mode on the previous generation, I always thought that there was room for a much more comfortable, a much more supple ride. But with the 2024 year model, on the new system, that difference, it has actually separated just that little bit more. And what we've still got our dynamic suspension mode, which provides all the control we need when those speeds really pick up. But importantly, at the bottom here, with that road mode, they have improved the comfort. And that, combined with the changes to the seat, really have had a very positive impact on the ability to now take your XR on tour. Now, obviously, there are huge differences between the GS and the XR. But in terms of suspension, I think the changes that they've made have actually brought the two bikes closer together, because in the road mode on the XR, you can find a really comfortable place behind the bars. You know, the bars aren't as high as they are on the GS, they're a little bit further forward and they're further down, but that whole position is much more comfortable. And then combined with the changes that they've made to the rear spring strut assembly and those algorithm changes to the compression and rebound, I have really enjoyed it, and I think it's worth highlighting. And if you've been on the earlier XR and you thought it wasn't comfortable enough, you really should try the new one, because the combination of the seat and those suspension changes in road mode have actually made it a genuinely capable all-round bike. So I use my GS, I commute on it, I also go on tour on it, and it's a comfortable place to be. Now, the original XR, I would never dream of taking it on a tour because of the vibrations, the seat, and the road mode. In terms of suspension and that lovely supple feeling that you should be getting, you never really felt with the older generation. But with the new bike, I've been really impressed, and I really wouldn't have a problem now going on tour with the new XR. Let me just show you some clips. So this section of road degrades very, very quickly as we move up through the mounting. But what we can do, a quick press of the suspension button here on the left-hand side, followed by a second quick press, we can very easily change from dynamic mode to the road mode suspension setting. And it has a huge impact on how the bike feels. Now, this road is actually pretty bad. It's one that I use for a lot of suspension testing on motorbikes. You can still see that the XR is moving around quite a bit with those road conditions, but let me tell you, it is a lot more controllable than it was on the previous generation. And what this does, the suspension is now able to keep those tyres front and rear firmly in contact with the road. You have a much better connection with the road surface, and it is a more comfortable place to be when you're riding on these sort of roads. Now, when you do change the suspension mode from road to dynamic, these are the sort of roads that the XR absolutely loves, especially if you can mix in some elevation changes and lots of corners. It's really happy on these sorts of roads. And then you combine the suspension change with the ride mode change from road to dynamic, or perhaps dynamic pro, and then you move into your favorite settings with regards to traction control and wheelie control. It is an awful lot of fun. But when you do pick up the pace and you're railing through these corners at quite a bit faster speed than this, the bike is composed and very, very stable. It's just a lovely place, and it's very, very different to the GS when you're doing this sort of thing, and it is an awful lot of fun. So another positive surprise is when you take off the one-piece seat, underneath the passenger seat, you actually have quite a bit of room. And importantly, we now have a USB plug, but it is not USB Type A. Finally, BMW have moved into the 21st century and we have USB-C. And it's just a shame that the one at the front of the bike is still the old-fashioned DIN plug. And actually this compartment under here is actually quite large. You could very easily get some tools, a safety vest, some water, and charge your mobile phone, and there's a bit of a space here too. And it looks like when the seat's on, there's still a little bit of room underneath here. So overall, I'm quite impressed with the under-seat storage for a sports bike. Now, at the front of the bike, you also have a space that you could get a pair of glasses in and the ignition key to the bike. It's not a big space, but it's something to work with. So originally I didn't have any plans to do a pillion section in the XR video because BMW already have several bikes in their range. For example, the RT and the GS. They're much more comfortable places to be for both the rider and the pillion. Now, although the XR has got an upright riding position for the rider, I wasn't really sure how comfortable it would be. But in the end, we decided you wanted to do some testing.
Oh, definitely, because that evening Carl came home in the pouring rain. I walked out and thought, this is a stunning bike.
It is a stunning looking
bike. I want to have a go as well.
So what we decided to do, we decided to keep it nice and simple. We just did a 3-hour route. We did a mixture of A roads, B roads, and we took it on the
motorway,
the Autobahn's unrestricted speed limit, so we could pick the pace up a bit and see what it's like at speed. In terms of setting on the bike, we had the ride mode in road, the suspension mode in road, and the suspension on the rear was set to automatic, and the tyre pressures were the standard tyre pressures. So I think the first question is, how did you find the general seating position in comparison to the 1250?
Bearing in mind it's a sporting machine, it was really positive. So the position behind you was very similar to the GS. The footpegs were fine. The grab handles, that was an interesting thing. They were similar to the 1300 because they have these hollow bits underneath.
Yeah, so if you haven't seen the comparison between the 1250 and the new R1300, the old 1250 has a solid grab handle.
Which I love.
Which is really very, very comfortable. But the newer bikes have these injection molded grab handles, that's the R1300 and the XR, and they don't have sharp edges as such, but it's not as comfortable to hold for a pillion, as we found out during the test. So in terms of seat height, how did you find me? Because you know where I'm normally sitting on the GS. Were you sitting higher or lower?
It was a little bit higher, possibly something like a centimetre,
about a
so
centimetre.
No big difference to the 1250.
I'm 6 foot 1 meter 83, and you are
167.
167, so you have our heights. Okay, so in terms of the relationship between the foot pegs, the seat and the bars, fairly similar, not the same, but fairly similar. Seat comfort. There's a lot of things about comfort in the XR. So how did you find the seat? Bearing in mind we did 3 hours, we didn't stop, and with the R1300 after an hour you wanted to get off the bike. So how did you find the XR?
Well, again, positively surprised. It was, I would say, in between the two GSs. So I would put the 1250 comes up here, the R1300 is somewhere here, and then I would put the XR in between and possibly a bit closer to the 1250. The seat is not as comfortable, and after some hours, well, I would say 3 hours, that's totally fine. I wouldn't want to go on tour with it, but for an afternoon ride, that's totally fine.
The XR seat, in terms of pillion comfort, the seat is actually quite comfortable, and you'll very easily be able to get afternoon rides, or if you do a day ride and you're having a lunch break in the middle, you're probably going to be fine. It's not the same as a GS, but it was actually fairly comfortable. So this was a surprise. There is one thing to highlight, and this is the screen. So on the standard XR, the screen is neither a touring screen or a sport screen. It's somewhere in the middle, and you just have two positions. You have the upper position and the lower position. So I'm going to just mention this because I think it's important depending on where you live and the type of road you ride on. When we were riding 2 up at the national speed limit here in Germany, which is very similar to back in the UK, 100 kilometers an hour or 60 miles per hour, no problem. No problem for the rider, no problem for the pillion. When that pace picks up to 70 miles per hour, which is the motorway speed limit in the UK, and then when you get up, there was no problem. But at 80 miles,
starting
at 80 miles per hour, which is about 130 kilometers an hour, we started to notice quite a bit of turbulence. And I actually had to hold on quite firmly on the bars because I found my body shifting and it was being knocked left to right because of that screen. And I think what's happening here is that wind is pouring over the top of the screen and around the sides. And because it's neither a short sports screen or a tall touring screen, then that wind then has quite an effect on both the rider and the pillion. So you actually found it quite uncomfortable once the speeds picked up over 130 kilometers an hour, which is about 80 miles an hour.
Yes, but for me it started beforehand because I could see your head moving around from sort of 70 onwards. And very soon afterwards, I could really feel it in my neck.
But at the normal speeds, up to about 110 kilometers an hour or just over 70 miles per hour, it's absolutely fine. And that standard screen does a good job and you don't feel anything. But when that turbulence kicks in as those speeds increase, the other thing that comes with turbulence is noise, and it does get quite noisy. Even with earplugs in, we both found it quite an unpleasant place to be. But I think with a short screen on it, it would be very different. So, comfort for the new 2020 S1000XR, both from the rider and the pillion's position. I think we're going to give it an 8 or a 9 out of 10. What would you give it?
Yeah, possibly a 9.
Possibly a 9. And I would probably give it an 8 out of 10 for rider comfort. Actually, it's a nice place to be.
Yes.
So let's move on. So who is this bike aimed at? Well, I think because what BMW have been able to do over the last few years, they have developed their ride modes to such a degree, and it's a very, very clever system. You can select a ride mode that matches your level of experience. And this is really important because I think a beginner coming from perhaps the middleweight sector doesn't need to be afraid that it's 170 horsepower, and you don't need to be afraid of that, because if you ride the bike in ride mode road, you still have full power, but that power delivery is very controlled. And if you want full power, you're going to need to wind that throttle on fully, and you're going to need to let those RPMs build north of 6,000 RPM. Now, combined with the ride mode road, if you use the bike in suspension mode road, you have a very compliant bike. And with those two settings, road over here, I would have no problem recommending this to someone that's coming up from the middleweight sector. This has gone from a bike that I wouldn't buy, I wouldn't entertain at all, to a bike that actually I would think about buying, and I wouldn't have any problems taking this bike on a tour, because the suspension in suspension mode road, it is actually very, very, very comfortable. And then for those of you that are more experienced, or maybe you've been riding for a good 5 or 6 years, you've got the option to move up over here on the right hand side from ride mode road into dynamic mode, and then things really start to change. The reaction to your input with the throttle is much more immediate. That power delivery comes on much stronger. You will need to combine that with changing the suspension mode from road to dynamic, because as those speeds pick up, and they do pick up really quickly, you are going to need more control from the front and the rear. And BMW allow you to do that with changing that suspension mode from road to dynamic. And also at the same time, when you do go to dynamic mode in the suspension, it is advisable to change the spring preload setting from minimum to auto, which is kind of like the self-leveling on the rear of the bike. And that is a really nice way to ride this bike. And then, of course, if you are a really experienced rider and you know what you're doing, of course you can then move over here on the right hand side from the dynamic mode into dynamic pro, and you've got lots of options, including over here on the left hand side. You can turn your traction control completely off. For those of us that have been riding for 40 odd years, that did learn the hard way how to ride a bike with no traction control, no ABS, no wheelie control, none of that sort of stuff on our bikes. It's a very pure way to ride this bike, and you do have to show it some respect, because then if you turn traction control off, you are dealing with, especially when you've got the throttle response in Dynamic Pro, you really do have a bike that can bite you, so you do have to be careful. Now, it is a sports bike engine, so it really does like to rev, and if you want to get the best out of this bike, you're going to need you're going to need to live somewhere where you can really open it up, because when you open it full gas in second, third and fourth gear, in second gear, within a couple of seconds, you are way above the national speed limit in all the countries that we live. So you're going to have to be very, very careful. But if you have got a place where you can do that, or you're comfortable riding that way, you will be rewarded with a very engaging, exciting, enthralling ride, because that engine loves to be revved. in a couple of hours' time, I've got to put my leathers back on and take the bike back to the dealer. Has my impression changed from that rather enthusiastic mid-test video? No. This has been a really big surprise in a very positive way. What BMW have been able to do with this bike, they've taken it from a bike that I definitely wouldn't buy to something that I would genuinely consider having. The difference that that seat makes should not be underestimated. There's really not a cramped space between the seat and the pegs. I'm 6 foot tall, 1.84 m. I'm slightly taller in my upper body than I am with my legs. My jean size is a 32 inch, so that you've got an idea. I can get both feet flat on the floor. In terms of that rider triangle, foot peg seat and bars, it's not the same as a GS, but it's fairly similar. And I've had no backache, no neck ache, and it is just a lovely, the bars are just that little bit further forward. So when you pick up the pace and you lean into the front of the bike, and when you're deep in those turns and you really are pushing on a bit, you want to get your weight up the front of the bike, over the front of that wheel. And it's all just so easy. They've done a brilliant job with all these little changes. It has combined into a bike that I would now seriously consider. And I've had a smile on my face the entire time. I think this is a bike that can appeal to incredibly capable and experienced riders, and also those riders that want to stay with the BMW brand. Perhaps they're coming up from a smaller capacity bike and like the idea of having an inline four with that rush of adrenaline, which definitely does come, but also to be able to get your feet firmly on the floor. You've got a really comfortable, convenient place behind the cockpit. This screen, it's not brilliant, but it does a reasonable job. I have enjoyed what BMW have done with the new XR. It is a really big update. BMW, you've done a great job. Anyway, thank you for your time. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.